Okay, well, thank you very much, Carolina, for inviting me back. This is kind of somewhat my spiritual home. And this building, I remember poring over design plans for this building, so I always feel very at home here. Okay, so I think this project is a good example of perseverance, I think we would say. I think both Tanaya and we were both at Warwick at the same time. It's an example of kind of, I don't know what you would call it, some kind of structured serendipity in which you have a platform university where arts and sciences can and do talk to one another. And you just simply invited me for coffee and said, you do film, you're interested in women and ageing and media. Let's put in a grant. You put in the first grant. This is an example of failing, actually. So we failed twice before we were successful. I think if we had to count the thousands of words of failure before, it would far outweigh the words of success. So you put in the grant, you didn't get it. We had diabolical feedback that we poured over. I put in the grant to someone else, I didn't get it. More, even worse feedback. There's one particular reviewer hated this project so much. And then finally we put into the Leverhulme and they decided to take the risk. So the team is actually me leading it with Tanaya and Sanjay. So we now have 3 universities involved because Tanaya and I moved. So we're kind of up the spine from England to Scotland. And Danielle, who's here, is the PhD student attached to the project. Okay, so together we've been developing, I guess, what we're starting to call the AI gaze, as in G-A-Z-E, gaze, to explore concepts of accuracy, truthfulness, and equity with regards to ageing in screen media. That is, what we will say and what we'll bring to the surface is that movies and television have to be remembered in themselves as part of the training data of machine learning, and we can say a little bit more about that later. But these are ways of reminding and intervening in the AI gaze, which, like other gazes in screen studies, those who know their screen studies theory would be the male gaze of Laura Mulvey, and other gazes that came along, female gaze, etc., to disrupt the male gaze, is a way of looking. So we are kind of engaged in a way of looking at AI, looking at, if that makes sense, at films. This project is about, and I guess we've put this in the frame of memory or remembering, because it's about remembering, forgetting, recuperating older women on screen, that we think the AI gaze and gazing at AI doing its work is most productive. Because ageing women on screen are playful, disruptive, monstrous, shameful, passing as younger, quite often, transgressive, both hyper-absent and hyper-present. So there's an interesting mix of visibility and invisibility with the ageing woman in film and television. So it's not a project about generative imagery, using AI to generate imagery, that alters the production, use, reception and handling of images of women. I think other researchers are doing that quite nicely. But it is about a mnemonic practice, thinking about mnemonic as about remembering, a mnemonic practice of bringing imagined and real older women visually alive, but in terms of this method. This is a project that uses older women in film and television to negotiate with machine learning and its visualizations as it tries to report back on the number of, the location of, the speaking time of, the representation of older women on screen. And in doing so, in focusing on film and television, it's looking at characters, and therefore it's trying to unpack what screen aging is for women in particular. Okay, I'll go back and explain a little bit about the history of how we got here, because slow research is really important in the context of AI. So go back a bit, but not too far, to the late aughts and the early 2010s. The literature from media theory around this time tells us a lot about cultures of aging on screen, particularly for female characters. How the male gaze and the female gaze have influenced those cultures, how media studies theorists, particularly feminists, have recuperated older women in film and TV through cultural and textual research. Say a little bit more in the next slide about aging femininities, the silver screen, remembering older women in media archives. So we built on the early findings of a HRC network grant that I was involved in 2010. So this is now 15 years ago. And it's interesting, you think things from 15 years ago, you just look back, you just look back to something that was really important to you 15 years ago. So this was the Women, Ageing and Media Network funded by the HRC. And it was focusing on cultural texts that expose predominant cultural narratives of ageing. It was kind of relatively new in thinking about ageing women in popular culture. Within the representational sphere, issues of gender, sexuality, race, identity and subjectivity have surfaced that we found in the network as the most significant strands of inquiry in media and ageing research, and industry inclusions and exclusions around diverse images and diverse workforces. So we were kind of trying to get in early around that idea of diversity and inclusion around ageing in media industries. In relation to debates focusing on the power dimensions, our project now could actually range widely if we wanted it to. It could explore the roles and representations of women on film and in television, in popular music, music videos, advertising, marketing, broadcast news, social media. There's a whole range of areas we could focus on, but we've chosen film and television. When I look back at the early media research I did out of that Women, Ageing and Media project, we had a strong focus at that time on Madonna's music videos and the fact she just turned 50 at the time. And at that time, we could see this kind of remembering of the ageing star as becoming increasingly younger as she got older. So you get in the beginnings of this process of successful ageing. What began to dominate media were actresses, or let's call them actors, female actors, presenters, performers, and celebrity personalities who were either lauded as models of successful youthful ageing or were unregulated objects of body snarking. So they present themselves in contradictory and transgressive ways. And early research I did with Kristin Gorton around Madonna for Feminist Media Studies Journal was focused on that. Ageing women on screen have then for quite some time been a form of inauthenticity and horror. The horrific extent to which online media trolling treats the subject of her ageing body and supposedly age-inappropriate behaviour with disgust and hatred. In the last 15 years, while Madonna has got younger, she has also got older and younger at the same time, and the constant live logging of her life has produced a vast amount of data that can be accessed by users, third parties and platforms to remember, record, capture ageing faces and bodies, hers among them, but also any other actor. And it's upon these data sets that we're kind of interested in, what's built into these data sets in our project. So that's kind of some of the background. And you'll see that's a lot of the literature that was done out of that network was all kind of published in relation to the Women, Ageing and Media Network. And I think it came up with a few points really. Film and TV scholars typically analyse media texts manually. It's painstaking work. You've got fantastic film and television department here at Warwick, and they engage in really deep history, deep learning, deep meaning, deep interpretation around textual analysis. It's thoughtful and time-consuming. It doesn't always gel with what film and TV industries practice or a diversity reporting of the film and TV industries, and that's something that we wanted to explore in our project. There's also a kind of whole group of archetypes that came out of that early research: lavender ladies, dotty old dears, older female sleuths, overtly sexualised, and particularly producing bodily norms of whiteness. So successful ageing is usually white ageing for women. And we've had reviews in policy terms from the Centre for Ageing Better from 2021 around how women are represented as they get older in relation to how men are represented. And of course, the argument is that there are far fewer women, particularly women of colour, in media industries and in media representations. So in mainstream media forms, the ageing femininities research that came out of the network found that representation of older women reduced them either to these negative stereotypes, acting as a cultural warning to young women about the traumas of ageing, often manipulating ideas of disgust or fear. And we came up with a manifesto. I'm not going to go through it other than to just highlight the key points around misogyny, diversity, issues of class, race, non-normative sexualities and materiality, older women being more central to the debates around their own identities. Number 5 was very much about intergenerationality, because feminism had very much, for quite a number of decades in all its waves, nearly always focused on young women, or at least women who were reproductive age. So there was something interesting within feminism itself. It was ignoring the post-menopausal. And at the heart of it was around forms of activism. How could research be more activist in bringing older women into these more visible areas of media and media representation? So we started, myself and Tanaya, were having this coffee and thinking about things like The Devil Wears Prada and The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, thinking about Meryl Streep's character and Judi Dench's character. And we thought film and TV would be particularly instructive for this project because older women on screen were becoming a more visible presence in film and television. But then what we started to realise as we were kind of testing things, and you'll say more about how we do that, is that there were things that the AI gaze just instantly just cannot see. It can't see the things that we see as critics and audiences and as cultural consumers. So that already tells you that the first issue is to accept what an AI gaze cannot see, if there is such a thing as an AI gaze at all. It's missing so much about culture and art while calculating at scale. And yet it can be a tool for a media archaeological approach, and we should also think about what that might mean if we started to bring AI into our methodologies in a kind of more, thinking about more mathematical approaches, this human, non-human, human kind of qualitative and the non-human being more calculating or calculating something. So this is more computational, technical approach to media themselves as social memory objects of our own lives, but also of our cultural consumption. So if media are apparatus for remembering aging characters, stars, archetypes, faces, bodies over time, and you might think of the difference between a film franchise of an aging character or a long-form TV series or a reality TV series that goes over 30 seasons. The key thing is that it's a methodological innovation that is looking at scale and can unlock a new way of generating data. And this data is needed to address some kind of organisational forgetting or some kind of social forgetting that we in fact do age. We do actually get older. This is kind of a fact. Okay. So an AI gaze, or what others have in other areas have called an algorithmic gaze, might be white, it might be Eurocentric, and it might be a male gaze, perpetuated at scale. So that's one of the first kind of critical questions and challenges that we've been turning over in our minds as a team. But it also might be something else. It might be confused as much as it seeks accuracy. Its confusion around aging, its confusion might be really important to explore and expose and be interested in. Like the male gaze, there are many things that it cannot see or it gets wrong, and it's the getting wrongness that's really interesting and to focus on. And there are many things that the male gaze got wrong about women, and this is even the same but at scale. So, for example, it cannot see that Miranda Priestley here is playing Meryl Streep, who's playing Anna Wintour, the head of Vogue. It can't see that the wig has a backstory, and there's a whole Reddit kind of backstory to the wig because no one can believe it's a wig. They all think it's Meryl Streep's hair, and there's just some interesting things there about craft, cosmetics, the use of the makeup department. It's looking at the perception of age with Judi Dench's character, and it's perceiving her as 58, but she's in her mid-70s at filming. And that's quite different for different genders as we go through. So we'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. So this was our research goal. I'm going to hand over to Tanaya because she's going to take you through some of the more technical parts of this, and it'll come back to me. But the aim of our project was to, and is, we're in year 1 of 3, to build a new form of what you might call interdisciplinary looking that remembers in itself its own film origins of how it came into being. It sees ageing women on screen, and it makes meaning about screen ageing from multiple ways of human and non-human looking. And that's the key. It's the human and the non-human looking and what that might mean for us. So it's not me as a single critic or cultural critic reading a single text and then communicating that analysis to an audience, to a book. It's a team with a non-human actor who's working with us and looking at it in a multiple way. We're trying to make meaning, I think, through a more human-centred AI that seeks to automatically analyse the portrayals of women characters on screen by looking at the visual audio data and also the text data. So, Tanaya, to you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you, everyone, for listening about our project and the history and how we got started here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the technical part does, and if at any point of time I use a term that you're not familiar with, feel free to stop me. Okay, so we're talking about quantifying because that's what computer scientists can do. We are good at quantifying, and then we have to make sense of those numbers, and that's when we need people like you, because otherwise the data that we generate will not be meaningful. So that's the objective. We want to quantify representation, which essentially will give you some sort of numbers. And these are some past research that people have done in terms of quantifying representation in screen media. Some of you may be familiar with Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media. During my postdoc years in USC in Los Angeles, I used to collaborate with them. We had a project. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So that's called the SeeJane project. That's where it started, where we started quantifying media. And the reason we started using machine learning is that you cannot do it by hand at scale, right? So that's where it all started. And then when I came to UK and we had chat, and we came to know about the BBC's 50/50 project, where they were trying to do pretty much the same thing, counting the cast and also the crew behind the camera to see the representation. So this is what past research is. I probably should also mention Stacey Smith, who has done a lot of work in looking. The first plot is from one of our papers, where they counted the number of female characters in Hollywood movies over the years, and usually they look at, these are all hand counted. So these are also kind of our gold standard when it comes to generating the numbers that computers generate. And what do they mean? So these are also kind of the standard that we compare with, the number that we generate, and how does it compare with the numbers that humans have generated, spending hours and hours of their lives. So a little bit about the history of ML and films. You might think there is no connection, but from a person who's been working in ML and AI for many years, more than 15 years now. Actually, I was using this word, this phrase all the time, that computer scientists or ML scientists owe a lot to films and TV, because we have been using films and TV a lot for training models. So you will see that a lot of the algorithms that you already use on a daily basis, it's integrated in your smartphone, like face identification, smile detection, voice detection, ASR, which is automatic speech recognition, translation. A lot of these things have been trained on data from movie and TV, like subtitles versus the audio that gives you automatic speech recognition. Translation, when you dub a movie to another language, that's used as the data for training machine learning models to learn translation. So even today, if you go and see a lot of benchmark data sets that we use, they are basically clips from movies and TVs. So this is from one of the very popular data set called AVA dataset, which was produced by Google. This is basically a large number of clips from movies and television, and you can see they're being used for detecting people, their postures, their actions, also their gender, age, and sometimes their attributes like what clothes they're wearing, what objects are there. So that's kind of a very close connection that you have. But unfortunately, most ML models have only thought of film content as training data. And they haven't looked at deeper questions like what if we analyze this data from a more human-centric perspective? And that's the question we asked. So we have this video. It actually goes back 10 years. So this is part of the time when I was in University of Southern California working on the SeeJane project. And it basically tells you how we started and why we started doing this quantification. I'll just play this video for maybe a minute or so.
Since 2005, the Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media and SeeJane have been concerned with gender roles in media popular with young audiences. Dr. Stacy Smith and her team at USC Annenberg have worked with Geena Davis and now with researchers at USC's Viterbi School of Engineering.
We basically take a census of film. We count every speaking character, that's anyone that utters one or more words on screen. Over the last 5 years, females represented less than a third of all speaking characters. Yet, females are 50% of the population and they buy 50% of the tickets at the box office domestically. Clearly, these statistics are challenging, and so is the work in our lab.
Each year, over 50 research assistants are trained in a 6-week process that requires them to attend class sessions, practice on content, and demonstrate that they can use the coding system correctly. It can take 8 to 10 hours to completely examine a feature film.
Accurately capturing every speaking character without double counting is a difficult process. On average, over 40 characters per film, the majority of which are fleeting or forgettable. Then there's telling apart the ones that appear similar to one another. Think about the film Despicable Me. How many unique minions are there? How many have one eye versus 2 eyes or 3 strands of hair? And which one is Dave?
Okay, so you can understand that it was a very painful process, very tedious process to count characters by watching movies. And of course, we want researchers' time to be used in more meaningful ways. So that's what we started doing, that why don't we move this tedious process to computers? Computers can do this counting for you, and you can concentrate on the more nuanced, more subtle aspects of analyzing films. So that's where it started. In 2015, we had first published work that proposed a machine learning framework that can automatically measure the screen time and speaking time of male and female characters appearing in Hollywood movies. So basically, it gives you some numbers like how long a character has been seen on screen. Of course, we can only detect the face. So if somebody is facing backwards, we will not count that time. And then also speaking time means even if they are present, whether they have a dialogue, whether they are actually speaking in the movie or not. So this is just an output, if you put our algorithm into work, this is how it looks like. This is just a demo.
Natalie is a respectable girl from a very
So it identifies the gender by the color of the bounding box. And also when somebody is speaking or not speaking, so you can see there are 2 speakers here with 3 people appearing on screen. So this is of course 10 years ago, and after that AI has moved forward pretty rapidly. And we also saw since 2015 there's some other works that came up which followed similar methodology. They use computation along with creative methodologies. Like one of this project is Gender Equality Monitor project in France. And we also saw very recently there's a paper coming from UC Berkeley where they were also using very similar methods following our approaches. So the general idea, the technical part, how it works, I'm just going to give you a very, very basic idea. So if you have this kind of input video stream, which could be an entire movie, 2 hours long, what we can do is we can detect all these faces automatically, and then we can group them according to the characters. So all the faces of the same character will go to one group. And then for each face or each character, whichever way we want, we can use neural networks, basically, which is AI or machine learning, whatever you want to say. We can ask them what they think is the perceived gender or perceived age, not the real age, not the real gender. The real gender is just perceived, because it's trained on perceived data. We don't have data from actual gender or actual real biological age. So the data we train this model are asking people what do they think this person age is, what do they think this person's gender is. So the perceived gender and age is what we can get, and then from that information we can compute how many times a particular person appears in a video. And you can also get more complex analytics. This is just example of very simple things that we are doing. So this is what happens when you run it on a full-length feature film. I think this was part of the pilot that we did, which was funded by Warwick. It was a creative technical pilot. So the Marigold Hotel, let me just explain what's happening here. So we have the actor names, which are automatically coming from IMDb after we gave the image and then try to match them on IMDb. So nothing is being done manually. The real age that at movie release is again crawled from IMDb, whatever they put there. It may not be correct, but that's what we can get. And the estimated perceived age is what AI gives you. And the confidence score within the parenthesis just means how confident the system is. If it's close to 1, it means it's highly confident. It's a smaller value means it's not so confident. So based on that, you can or cannot take these results seriously. And then we have only male and female at this point, the perceived gender. So this is an example of the results that we can get at this point. This is again was a bit old, right? 2018, 2019 maybe, at that point. And this is fast forward to currently what we have, part of our Leverhulme project. So we have a much more advanced model now, because as we spoke, we have better models, better AI already. So we use some more advanced, more powerful foundation model, as you might have heard the term, which basically are very, very large models trained on almost on the entire internet. But that's a different debate, how good it is, what bias there are. But we use this kind of models, and then we can get the similar results. However, we can get it with a little bit more accuracy. So we did this kind of extracted these analytics from movies, and then for the part of this project, we also tried to look for ways how to communicate these results with people. So what would be a good way to visualize this kind of analytics, this kind of data? And our PDRA in this project, Eve Doxe, is not in this project anymore, but this was her work. So she did these visualizations, and she tried different ways of making sense of this data so it is easy for lay audience to see and understand. And this is actually for 3 real films that we did. These are real data, this is not simulated data. These numbers come from the AI algorithm for 3 films. We show these visualizations to participants like subjects. We don't tell them the names of the movies, but they are real movies. And then we ask them different questions about how much they understand from this data, whether they like it, whether they trust it, these kinds of things. So we wanted to do this kind of study, how much, even if you get these numbers, how useful that will be, whether it will be easy to understand, whether people trust at all these kinds of AI data. So this work is currently under peer review, so I will not go into a lot of details, but it might be interesting to note what we found in the user study. So we had like about 30 people who looked at these visualizations, and then we asked them all these different questions. And this is what they said, that they found the tool, if we make it available, they found it to be overall useful. And they wanted more information. They wanted, like, we only showed them gender and age, but they wanted to see more information about the characters and sometimes maybe more context in which the characters are appearing, which is also one of our project goals, that we want to look at those things. And then the participants' trust towards these results was moderate to low, so which is understandable. And they were not what we thought they would be, but they're not fully against using AI in this context. And if anybody is interested, these things will be, all this data, all the code and everything will be made available quickly, hopefully after we get our acceptance of the work. So what are the challenges from the technical side? So first of all, what I was asking, that even let's say we have an AI that generates this analytics from characters and can do all sorts of things, who wants this? Is it useful to anybody, right? So that's one of our major questions. And if we know who our target audience will be, do we need to develop the AI from their perspective so that it gives you something that is useful to you? And then the second big question is, numbers don't mean anything if you don't contextualize them, if you don't have the story behind them. So that's where we want to develop methodologies together, that how do we make sense of these numbers so they are useful in probably to make some changes for good in the industry and the effect media has on general people, lay people. From more technical side, we have been debating about what sort of models to use and whether it is ethical to use them. But what turns out that today the models have become so large that in an academic setting it's almost impossible to train them from scratch. So we kind of have no choice other than using some of these big Britain models. And we don't know whether they have been trained, because they are not always transparent what data they have been trained on. And unfortunately, there is no way you can take it out. Once it's trained, it's there. It's kind of imprinted in the memory, cannot take it out. So that's something we have been thinking about, whether to go for like small, less powerful models where we have more control versus you go with large models where you lose your control. And also that brings the question that, because we know these models have their own biases, their fairness problems, although people are more aware of it, people are tasting these things more often, but because we don't have a lot of control over them, by using these models, are we propagating the bias into our results and analytics?
Yeah, so you can imagine what the next steps are. There's like enormous next steps in thinking about this. We've got lots of things to think about. We did Marigold Hotel, we've done Buffy, we've done a few other things, and we're interested in, and we're talking about as a team, well, what films and TV and why? Which ones do we analyse? You know, particularly when we're looking at women and ageing. Is it about horror? Is it about the form? Does the film form matter? The TV series matter? Is it scripted, unscripted? So the BBC's 50/50 project. And R&D, they're a consultant on the project as well as learning on screen. BBC's really interested in unscripted. They're interested in news and sports and that kind of live public service broadcasting material. They want to see what they're doing in that space, whereas others might be more interested in the scripted and the drama. Some of this is about, I guess, what we're always doing in our meetings is kind of trying to slow down something that's moving very fast, and also trying to, as we write about this, remember the manual human origins and also the film and TV that was built into its own learning, things that it's forgetting. There are fewer, as Tanaya was saying, you know, there are fewer representations on screen of older women, and so AI training on perceived age could be limited in terms of what it has scraped from. So it's the collecting of more examples and thinking about, do we go for something that's smaller and then inaccurate but bigger but more accurate, but then also got the problems involved. We've talked a lot about, and this is our PhD students working on genre in particular, and the way in which film and television and representations of older women are messy and transgressive you know, we've got very young faces on quite older bodies. And we've been really interested in, particularly in the TikTok culture, around the way in which media audiences are trying to detect age away from the face. So are we looking at the wrong thing? Is the AI gaze, should it be looking at necks and hands? And if Madonna has always hidden her hands in gloves, you know, there's all these different things. And in particular, we were talking about the substance yesterday. The focus in the film is on her knee. So should we be looking at legs and knees for aging, you know, to get, if it's about accuracy, then we should be looking at different body parts, because faces aren't really helping us at the moment in film and TV. So this is about all the aging that's different on screen, even on the same bodies. So the same body can look different ages in film and television. And a part of that is also then about passing as younger, shaming, aging, reveals the outside and inside the text, outside the text of the paratext of the star. So one of the big outputs of the research will be Danielle's project right now. She's focused on the substance, that female character's age on screen that does not age in the same way and at the same rate. The next thing we're going to do once our PDRA, second PDRA is appointed, is get AI to watch the substance and see what it does and thinks and what it can see. And that'll be really interesting. So the way in which film itself, or a film, particularly a film, very recent film, which is specifically about aging woman's body, how that intervenes in our machine learning methods. So we're using film and TV not only to contextualize the questions of film and TV studies, and it's not necessarily about improving AI, but for revealing the biases, for revealing the historical and the representational that keep returning us to kind of remembering machine learning's origins itself on film and TV. So we think film and TV is quite a disruptive and interventionist example to use. So that's what we're focused on. Thanks.